Well, let's talk about last night's State of the Union address. It was a long one. President Trump spoke for an hour and 48 minutes, making it the longest address in recent history. He touched on a lot of topics from the economy to national security and, of course, sparked plenty of reactions along the way. And there's a Houston connection, too. But let's get a breakdown of all of this by somebody who is in the know. And he barely got any sleep, but he was kind enough to join us, political editor and the Hill Sunday anchor himself, Chris Stirewalt. And Chris, whew, that was something. I stayed up for it, too. A lot going on. Now, let's talk about the president and his response on the economy. And I know there are a lot of people around the country who are saying they may be hurting with the high prices and cost of living. But tell us your impressions from what the president had to say about the economy.
Are we sure it's over? I don't want to take anything for granted. The speech may still be going on.
Yes.
That was, by the way, longer than the longest ever State of the Union before, which was Bill Clinton's 26 years ago by 20 minutes. And it was longer than the longest ever address to a joint session of Congress, which was Donald Trump's own record, and he broke that by almost 10 minutes. So that was a doozy. I think the president's principal job was to reassure Republicans that he could keep it together, right? He had quite a week last week, and I think there were expectations that he might go off the rails, that he might condemn or attack the Supreme Court, but he mostly stayed on the teleprompter. It was let's say, instead of his typical 50-50, it was 85-15 of him sticking to the script and being mostly positive. He went after Democrats. He said just awful things about Democrats, but those were sort of the throwaway lines. Most of what he did was to tell the voters who already supported him in 2024 and tell the Republicans in that room that he could sort of keep it together and be cool. And markets like that, everybody responds well when they feel more confident that the president has got it together.
Very much so, and I agree with you with that 85-15 response right there. He did stick to that script. Now, there was a Houston connection at the very start of the State of the Union involving Representative Al Green, having him escorted again, because that happened last year, too. I had a chance to actually talk to him live about 45 minutes ago. We're talking about Al Green, about why he decided to put that sign up, talking about what it said, black people aren't apes, right during the State of the Union. He said he had to do it because in response to the social media post. But what was the impression that you received from others that you have talked to and what you saw when Al Green decided to stand up and protest once again?
Well, I mean, it's his his thing in Washington, right? That was last year, and there was sort of what will he do this year? And he delivered and got himself thrown out and had his sign and alluding to the racist post about Barack and Michelle Obama. And I guess this is a bad way to think about it, maybe, but I think everybody got what they wanted out of that exchange. Al Green got to say what he wanted to say, and he got the attention at the beginning of the speech, and the Republicans get a villain that they can say, oh, look at how mean these Democrats, how undecorous and undignified these Democrats are. So I think that's one of those exchanges in the social media age where everybody got what they wanted out of that.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Now, let's talk about immigration. I know Trump was focusing on immigration and crime, and that's resonating with voters in a lot of cases. But how does his record on, of course, immigration and the deportations affect his credibility on these issues right now?
Well, you know, it was interesting. He talked about deportation. He talked about his success on that, but he didn't make it the central theme. And that speaks to what's happening behind the scenes and what's going on around town right now. And what's going on is it seems like the administration and Republicans in Congress would like a deal on funding for the Department of Homeland Security. When Secretary Kristi Noem, for example, tried to turn up the heat by canceling TSA pre-checks and making travel more difficult, the White House apparently told her, no, we want a deal. And what they've been doing in Minneapolis, Tom Homan said you can't do what Kristi Noem and her team wanted to do in Minneapolis, which is have these very high-profile confrontations that, of course, sadly, in Minneapolis led to the deaths of 2 citizens. But I think what you heard last night was enough for Republicans to say, hey, remember, we're going hard on immigration, but didn't make it such a big part of the speech to jeopardize a potential deal that might be based on essentially Homan's approach in Minneapolis.
That's a good way to break it down. Thank you for explaining it that way. Now, I have another question for you, and you may not realize this, but you probably do. We do have a lot of people from Venezuela who live right here in our own backyard here in Houston. And I know the president brought it up about, of course, the amount of oil that's coming from Venezuela to the United States and calling it a, quote, bright new beginning with Venezuela's new leadership. Now, how, though, did the president, in your opinion, kind of reconcile, or can he reconcile, the thousands of Venezuelans in U.S. right now, including communities here in Texas? They feel like they're living in limbo. And I know a lot of our producers were talking about this, living in limbo with the temporary protected status and other immigration policies. He really didn't bring that up that much, but has he mentioned anything about this? And what is your take on that?
Well, if you looked at Marco Rubio's face when they went to him, this guy's got a tough job, and it's a very difficult situation. So what the United States did in Venezuela was not what many Venezuelans wanted, which was to get rid of the regime, the Chavista regime in Caracas. What they did was they swapped out authoritarian rulers, right? They got rid of that dictator and they said, okay, now you run the country, but make sure you give us the oil. And I understand why that is appealing for a lot of Republicans in America to say, yeah, that's what we should have done with Saddam Hussein. That's what we should have done in these other conflicts, which is get the natural resources, and who cares about what happens there. But that's a way that the United States has typically not explicitly operated. Sometimes the United States operates that way and has operated that way. Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, for one example, Manuel Noriega, Saddam Hussein himself. The United States has sometimes ended up operating that way by backing strongmen and dictators for geopolitical advantage, but we typically don't do it explicitly. And the regime in Caracas right now is playing nice with the United States. How long can it all hold together? When will political unrest in Venezuela send that akimbo? What's going to go on with Cuba? There are a lot more questions than answers as it relates to what's going to happen with Venezuela.
Very much so. And also he mentioned about Iran, too, and a lot of questions about the possibility of going to war with Iran. I know a lot of people on both sides of the aisle were a little skeptical about this. What were your impressions from what he said last night when he brought it up again?
Well, he struck, and part of the reason markets responded well today was that he struck a conciliatory kind of tone with Iran. The saber rattling was fairly minimal. What causes people to think, though, that a strike could be imminent is that yesterday, before the State of the Union address, the Secretary of State gave a briefing for the top national security leaders in Congress, the Gang of Eight, and Republicans and Democrats, and basically told them, hold on to your hat because we're getting ready to go. And of course, we have the largest military buildup in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq so long ago. So the president was not trying to ratchet up the tension in the speech too much. He did call Iran out for the mass killings of protesters, but there are new protests in Iran. And I think the consensus in Washington is that it's not if, but when. And that, so we're all sort of holding on to our seats.
Now, I have time for just two more questions real quick. Before we get to what the Democratic response was and the highlights on that, I wanted to ask you, I found it very interesting that he was giving medals of honor during the actual State of the Union. Usually, often that's done at a separate ceremony. Did that surprise you? Because I know it surprised a lot of people.
Well, I mean, we have to always think of Donald Trump as a former television producer, right? He had a very successful game show, a reality show for many years. That's how a lot of Americans came to know Donald Trump. And he likes to produce that it had an Oscar night kind of energy to it, right? We're going to introduce this person and here are the celebrities and we're going to acknowledge those people. And he moved, part of the reason the speech was so long was that it was all from the United States hockey team to I assume the oldest person to ever receive a Congressional Medal of Honor.
Yes.
It was spaced out like an award show, and as a television producer, Donald Trump is a very good one. and he kept giving the audience new things. I felt like there was an Oprah moment, right?
Yes,
you get a car,
exactly.
and you get a car,
Exactly.
and you get a car. Yes.
I was thinking the exact same thing, so I'm glad we're on the same wavelength on that, because I was like, wow, it looks like a television show in a sense, but honoring a lot of people. But now, before we go, real quick, the Democratic response. What was your impression by, of course, having a newly elected governor from Virginia actually speaking about this?
I loved that she did not run from the 250th anniversary of the founding, but embraced it. She went to Williamsburg. She talked with obvious patriotic affection. She invoked her fellow Virginian, George Washington. She made it very clear that that she and her party were not rejecting patriotism, which is going to be a big deal in our 250th year. And I thought that was well done. And, you know, the best thing you can say, this is mean, but the best thing you can say about these State of the Union rebuttals is that they didn't turn into a disaster and will mostly be forgotten later on. And unlike many of the people who have had to do that difficult job before her, Governor Spanberger passed the test, committed no fouls, and scored no runs, but that's okay. She got out of it in one piece, and that's probably a win for her party.
Very much so. All right, Chris Stirewalt, you always do an excellent job preparing us for this and also wrapping it up, even on probably 1 hour of sleep. I'm feeling that for you, but thank you so much for just breaking it down so everyone can understand exactly what happened last night. And also, I want to promote your show, The Hill, Sunday, live Sundays at 9 a.m. on News Nation. You got to check it out. He has just a wealth of information. Chris, thank you so much for always bringing it to us, and we really appreciate it. So check him out on Sundays, everybody. It's going to be great.